Thank you very much. I thought I would follow Professor Chowkri and her presentation of the Draft International Accord. But I'm very sorry that I have to actually leave for another engagement.
It's okay.
But let me start by saying it's a very great pleasure and an honor for me to be with you today, with you, Governor Dukakis, once again. And it's an honor to listen to Ambassador Lambrinidis today. Coming from India, I would like to first respond with great feeling to Governor Dukakis, your view that we do not want a Cold War again. And anything that the world can do to prevent one, if not two Cold Wars would be most welcome. I also, what Ambassador Lambrinidis said about the ethical questions, about the delicate balance between privacy, human rights, law enforcement, security. Frankly, I mean, any technology brings these dilemmas to the fore, and AI brings it to the fore, I think, much more strongly than others because of its enormous capacity to both help progress and to harm it. Basically, we are discussing today, I think, the draft framework for an international accord on artificial intelligence, which Professor Chowkri has drafted a framework which I think is going to be discussed today. And I would like to really compliment her on an excellent, comprehensive paper, which captures the intricacies of the issues and also the breadth of the challenges. I think it's a perfectly valid point. Ambassador Lambrinidis also actually referred to it in one way, that transformations of artificial intelligence innovations and its applications move far ahead of our collective ability to fully appreciate both the opportunities and the threats from them. And therefore, while countries are really groping in many ways to develop their own AI policies at different levels of sophistication, there has been little realization of the importance of an international regime that promotes cooperation in moving it in a direction for human progress and mitigating the destructive potential. Professor Chowkri will, of course, be presenting the draft framework. And I, having seen it, I'm fully in agreement with the deliverables that she has identified in the draft framework, which I think merits wide discussion, and developing a methodology of approach, a collective methodology of approach to them. A few comments I have on such an international accord, also touching a bit on what Ambassador Lambrinidis said. I think it is very important that such an accord should be inclusive. This is because, unlike most other economic agreements, international agreements, where signatories can ensure that they abide by their provisions without reference to the activities or the actions of non-signatories, the borderless nature of AI tools means that those excluded from a multilateral compact would have no incentive not to use them to the detriment of others. And therefore, I think it is extremely important to have as many countries as possible inside the tent in order to be able to sustain a vibrant, a robust international accord on artificial intelligence. And that means, I was there at the last discussion that we had in the Boston Global Forum, where we talked about artificial social contract and particularly binding democracies. Ambassador Lambrinidis also mentioned this, the democracies as particular drivers of such an accord. The problem is that today there are far too many models, so-called models of democracy, and far too many variations even within these so-called models of democracy. I think that the important criterion in any international accord should be the willingness of a country, the willingness of a society, the willingness of a group to abide by agreed norms. not necessarily the system of governance that they adhere to. I think we need not be, our search for an agreement on an AI accord need not be influenced by judgments on the quality of democracy of a society wanting to join it. I have to give an example. I mean, you take Vietnam, for example. Vietnam would not be described as a democracy, and yet it is a disciplined member of the international community, abiding by international law. So if Vietnam is willing to abide by the discipline of an international accord, there is no reason to exclude it on the basis that it's not a democracy. I think this would be counterproductive for the kind of international regime that we seek to establish. Building on that is also this question of, as I said, the balance between the ethical balance between human rights, privacy, law enforcement, and security. Now, this varies in different societies depending on their geographical circumstances, on the political circumstances, on their surroundings, and on the social. So I think we need to be. I'm not justifying the kind of actions that the ambassador described that China is engaged in. But what I'm saying is that we cannot really evolve a universal standard of such behavior. So the what the draft actually does, which I have seen, is that it leaves national authorities free to frame, within limits certainly, their own practices, reconciling these various conflicting objectives, but binding countries to an international discipline on this. Another point was, again, in the accord, the draft accord talks about sanctioning violations of such of the accord. And I think in a subsequent correspondence with Professor Chaudhry, we discussed that perhaps better than sanctions would be an incentive regime. We have seen sanctions in recent years being applied not only against adversaries, but also against allies and partners, and primary and secondary sanctions. For one thing, they've spoiled the atmosphere, and for another, they have not achieved their purpose. So perhaps we should be looking at an incentive regime rather than a prescriptive forcing regime. I think the other point we need to keep in mind is the point of, again, Professor Chaudhry makes that point, of variance in AI capability around the world. And this reminds us of the digital divide, which actually divided societies and created strife. And I think we need to make sure that there is adequate capacity building regime to bring countries up to speed with their capacity to exploit the progress elements of artificial intelligence, as much as to also create the capacity to enforce any kind of regime that an international accord would establish. So these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to mention. Of course, India has been, as many of you would know, a founding member of the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, which seeks to promote responsible use of AI, promoting human rights, inclusion, diversity, innovation, and of course, economic growth, while also trying to promote expertise in research and development to support cutting-edge research in AI. So, to conclude, I think what we should, it's extremely important to see how we can promote responsible use of this powerful resource and keep out malevolent forces disrupting it. And it's very important in this respect that we talked about a political Cold War, but there is also this technological Cold War brewing. Again, mention was made of this. It is very important that we try to avoid a technological Cold War and promote a shared and responsible international approach to the use of AI. And this cannot be done without a background of the major powers of the world entering a modicum of cooperation rather than conflict, or not quite conflict, but tension at least. Thank you very much.